On the Jambanyasha, she said that Jambanyasha la du, the Chidani and Scarini, Tanyumoba, Dunga Sea, Tabata Temji Kimbio Toela, Nanga Jugi, and Nyomoba di Bango Warwa, the Nyomoba Pambala, the Lam Chicomche, and Yamlinche, Pangma the Champagne to get married. Just that Lam di Yamlin Chevala, so to get Jamba. Mi yu de la mi dong ji yu de la mi bi ge jamba tempo da de ne ani shera ki jeba chi che da nga ju gi de ne ki jamba da sherap tie an du che ne nga ju yu de mi bi nyam kom yap che nyam ne chi ne ane nyom ho bang go ba yin za da jamba nya sha shi se she ba re da de ne za da nga ju jamba nya sha shi la yo de jamba nya ji mi ba de ka re lam na da ane lu jamba ka so lu da so wa da sem chu shi de mi ba de che then an mi badela and canis gomgo arelana and mi badela mission, Jambi Tsinchi, Shiraki, and a rangi tsini, chi tsini, ni yoko, Tawa Jeba Cheche, and Dushin Gomgo Recherua, Raji Tsini, Tana Gomba Jeba Reche. And the Karichi to Gomgore Lamna, and the Denshi la Chupichi to Gomgores, Denjiam Slimbichi to Gomgoreche. Dana dine komana jama nyesha de kare lamna ngo kare lamna da rangi mipa lu da semche shibo karo mine ane jamba da sherab rangchi tsini yi da ne komba jibe jamba da sherab garong dibe lamshu ki kemba de la ane jamba nyesha la gore che dang zo kasin di bardo bashi da do shu sar che tsini de on di bardo she sar shu sabare.
Good morning. In general, for beings to achieve their desired state of happiness, a state freed of pain and misery, the afflicted minds are what have to be eliminated and in order to achieve liberation. This has to happen. The afflictions, together with the seeds, need to be eliminated in order to achieve liberation from suffering. That is how lasting happiness is achieved. And to bring this about, there's only one method, only one technique, and that is to cultivate mental paths. There's no other way. Mental paths have to be cultivated. And to do so, one utilizes mental factors such as mindfulness and wisdom when meditating on observed objects or cultivating objects of meditation. Now, so here, this brings us then to this skillful technique that is presented in the 4 close placements of mindfulness to achieve liberation from misery. We started by looking at what it is that one meditates on. We saw that everything that exists, all existence, are divided into the body, feelings, mind, and fourthly, phenomena. Thereafter, we looked at how to engage in the meditation. We saw that there was a common and an uncommon method, and within the common or shared method, one meditates first on the specific characteristic of the observed object, and thereafter on the general characteristics. Then we looked at the third outline, the purpose of the meditation, and that is to engage in the practice of the 4 noble truths. And then lastly, we came to look at the entity or the definition of the close placements of mindfulness, and we saw that that is an exalted wisdom engaged in practicing a path included in mindfulness and wisdom, having investigated the general or specific characteristics of any of the 4, body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. And that's where we've covered thus far.
The Mahayana did that Jambanyasha de la and Yawas down, Gawa San Samrosity or Mahayana.
Today, then, we'll continue looking at in page 6, starting with the 5th outline, that of divisions, which will be followed by the 6th, that of boundaries.
All right, Jambanyasha said the Delia, Yawal Masona, Gariores, and Yawashi, Yores, the Kitakisini, Shutavatare. Della Yena Ngabani, Della Yena, Lu Jambanyasha so she is, Chisa, Time me by Lula Mine, Lu Jambanyasha, Semjamba, Soa Jambanyasha, Semjambanya, Church Jambanyasha said, and then she, you are the most serious.
The divisions we see here in the middle of page 6, and there's nothing surprising or new. These we had presented right at the outset, so these we know already. When a close placement of mindfulness is divided, there are 4. Close placement of mindfulness on the body, close placement of mindfulness on feelings, close placement of mindfulness on the mind, close placement of mindfulness on phenomena.
다 주바 산삼시 오르다 가와네 가와바도 요래 세대 시트도 되네 초람네 상기 세바도 예시도 주바니 초람네 상기 세바도 예시.
Then the 6th outline is that of boundaries, or literally the borders of this of where close placements are to be found. And we see here the boundaries of the close placements of mindfulness are from the path of accumulation through to the Buddha ground.
나다 가와 잠만 예샤시 공헌이 가와 공고르스네 초람비 공고레 초람비 규래 요래 전 졸람바다 통람바다 곰람바 되네 아니 지게 야 상기 바도 요래 상기래 요래 제 다지 나다 람란 주세기비다 초람바 규래 안되네야 요새 데디어레스다 가리요 말에 랍디 초람바네 요래스도 람마토비니라 강사이 규래다 잠만 예샤시 세디 요 말에서 월당하실래선 그래서 요새디 초람네 요르마도 도구르마도 초람마도 니라 람 귤레마지 니라 다 잠반예시 시나네 다 잠반예시세 도구 말해시래.
Looking at the text here, the boundaries of the close placement of mindfulness are from the path of accumulation. This indicates then that when someone attains the path of accumulation, that is where, on the path of accumulation, is where they will attain an actual close placement of mindfulness on their continuum. So once they've achieved the path of accumulation, for the first time, they will cultivate and achieve an actual close placement of mindfulness on their continuum. They'll continue to develop this as they progress through the paths. Through the second path, that of preparation, the third, the path of seeing, the fourth, the path of meditation, and also the fifth, the Buddha ground, the path of no more training. On all 5 of the paths, the practitioner will have a close placement of mindfulness on their continuum. So those beings who do not have a close placement of mindfulness on their continuum are those who have yet to cultivate a path on their continuum. So those who have yet to achieve the path of accumulation, the first of the 5 paths, they don't have an actual close placement of mindfulness on their continuum yet.
다 듬바 다 자시엘레 거다 시 잠반야샤 세디 민다고 베가티시는 민 가네스타바레 세야지 베능한도 다 잠반야샤 세라 요도 디나네 가르요르스네 잠반야샤기 디나데 셰럽요레 안데 잠바요레 안데 셰럽도 손들 주베 셈요레 데네 안데 가서 소와요레 두시요레 누지요레 데네기다 군로가요레 디멤베 듬바요레 다마르 용구르와다 망부요레 이네 잠반예제 디 차상 셰럽디 잠바 마르와스 네 잠반예제 고주베 소와요레 디 잠바 마레스 셈요레 잠바 마레스 지사 잠반예제 나로랴 아니 셈 잠바 마인킹기 아니 지 셰바 망구두 인제서 잠바 마레스 지사한다 라요도다 디네 인자한다 마레데 이네 콘수 차상레 잠반예샤센 잠바냐샤센 잠바센 민다우도와스 디가르신 따바레시 고르바다 디다비 김센디 시월데 듬바니 셰르기 니카소레 셰르기 미비 율라 템베 냐바라샤디 미제바 짐베나 안데 잠바냐샤 제샤오 와샤디 김센로지.
Then we come to the 7th outline, that of etymology. So what is meant then by a close placement of mindfulness? Because we've heard a close placement of mindfulness has wisdom, and it has the mental factor also of mindfulness. So is the close placement of mindfulness wisdom? Is it mindfulness? What about the primary consciousness or main mind? Is it perhaps that? What about the other mental factors such as intention, aspiration, and so forth? Well, it is not wisdom alone. It's not mindfulness alone. It's not the mental factor of feeling alone. So what is meant by by a close placement of mindfulness is presented here in the etymology. Through wisdom, mindfulness is closely placed on the observed object, meaning it does not forget the observed object, and is thus called a close placement of mindfulness. So here we see an explanation of the meaning of the title, the term, close placement of mindfulness.
Sheregi mibi yu dembe nyawar shaba des, dembe nyawar shate, mijebar zimbe na dembe nyawar shaba sede. Jisan sherabki chebachi yu di, chebachi yu de la, dembe pa zinche, dembe yu di che ma jo bachi pa, dembe zinche nyadu ba inza, ane chasan le dembe nyashasmi tabare che. Jisan yu de la chebachi yu de la, sherabki chebachi, ane deniki chebachi yadu, chebachi yu di, so dembi zinche mache bache pa nya du kan su ji go se demba di chi go res jinan di chane an demba nya sha se mi da ba le che.
I'll read it again, the etymology again. Through wisdom, mindfulness is closely placed on the observed object, meaning it does not forget the observed object and is thus called a close placement of mindfulness. So here in the etymology we see the relationship and the respective roles that wisdom and mindfulness play. So the observed object that is to be investigated by wisdom, mindfulness serves to hold that, to apprehend that. And also mindfulness serves to ensure that whilst wisdom is investigating the object is not forgotten. So here we see the relationship and as well as the individual functions of the mental factor of wisdom and that of mindfulness.
Di zui jeban zo ko tamba ni chasan la tamba ni sha se tamba ni sha sta ma de tamba ni sha ina ane tamba yin go ha yo ma da ro shera bi yo re cho yo re du she yo re je da tamba ni sha ina ane tamba yin go ri be se tamba yin go ha yo ma re je ina tamba se ming ta be ki tamba ni sha se la go be gyum chen ka ra se yu di tamba ki zo tamba ki jin je ma je ba tamba jin de ba yin za tamba ni sha da ba re ma do tamba ni sha ina tamba yin go ha yo ma re she ro.
In the practice of a close placement of mindfulness, there'll be a wide number of mental factors involved. So we've already seen that the practice of the close placement of mindfulness does not refer solely to the utilization of mindfulness. And that is brought out now with perhaps ever greater clarity here in the etymology, that mindfulness plays a key role in that it apprehends the object and the object that is to be investigated, and ensures that that object is not forgotten. So in this we see here in the etymology, mindfulness is closely placed on the observed object, meaning it does not forget the observed object. But a close placement of mindfulness has key mental factors beyond mindfulness. There are others such as stabilization, as well as wisdom, which does the investigating. So therefore, it should be abundantly clear that the practice of a close placement of mindfulness, whilst mindfulness plays a significant role, is not the sole mental factor that plays a significant role.
ane sinzin person sigma do sinzin yo korgel ane lombo da ane kusonwa da ane shepju da tuyi dige person like marwa ine yomdu yodu kala mangbuji li gore ine anga zule person pe ma so la de sinzin person gebo person la lumbi gebo pe ban gebo le son la yodu da gebo de le kan le gebo jibu re bese mare gebi kor tuyi da shepju da ane je kusonwa da mangbuji yorwa chasan님 li gore ine 디나는 조로 지걸 개보진자 개보 패선라 거래. 제가 개보 패선라도 개보님도 망보지리기 여바데 용거래. 안디 나신다데 유디 마제버 진디가 조도 수지가 잠비 제바인자 디치는 거 Jambanyesha Smin Tawarwa. Dinashi is all that.
We can understand this through, if we think of previous royal visits to Australia. There would perhaps be some excitement that some members of the royal family were coming to Australia, but when they disembark from the aeroplane, whilst the cameras will be focused on them, the aeroplane wasn't empty apart from them. They will have been accompanied by a large entourage. Their security detail, their press people, their assistants of various types. They didn't come alone, but we only refer to the royals, despite them being accompanied by many. Similarly, should a prime minister or a president visit Australia, or our prime minister visits another country, then the prime minister is whom is invited, but the prime minister alone does not come. We refer to the visit of the prime minister, but we recognize that the prime minister hasn't traveled alone, isn't alone, but is surrounded by a large entourage. So that is similar here. The close placement of mindfulness has mindfulness in a key role, but there are other mental factors as well as the primary consciousness. And amongst those mental factors, there are others that also have a primary role, as well as others in a more supportive role.
Gyälwa di Jambanyesha di teaching Jambanyesha di teming Jambanyesha se niyo ba inza da teaching Jambanyesha di teming Jambanyesha le chodu gyubares. Da di chodu gyuba yimbige da kebaru karu yorasene ani kebar mongbu yores da di diwar ma shiyare.
Now let's turn the page in our text to page 7, and we come to the final outline, demonstrating that the close placements of mindfulness of the Mahayana are superior. To back up this statement, or to explain this statement, why of the two practices of the close placement of mindfulness, that engaged in the Tivada tradition and that in the Mahayana tradition, that in the Mahayana tradition is superior of the two, there are a vast number of 14 reasons presented as to why.
That's it. Gyälwa teaching Jambanyesha Chögyi temeng Jambanyesha le chodu gyurde dela gomba number jushi chodu gyubi chirse. Jada teaching Jambanyesha de temeng Jambanyesha le chodu gyuare. Jidan chodu gyube yimbi gyumzen de la kebar kar yorasene kebar jushi yores. Jidan kebar mongbu yuyu na yore de ineda zoru kebar jushi tanga gyabje jushi yore che sungore che.
Reading at the top of page 7. Meditating on the Mahayana close placements of mindfulness is superior in 14 ways to meditating on the Tivada close placements of mindfulness. So here, now we'll have 14 reasons presented why the close placements of mindfulness that is practiced in the Mahayana is superior. There are many more reasons, but these are the primary ones.
On the Keber Chushi Yore, that Keber Chushi de Gare Lanada, Nama Danga Yare, that Chushi de, that in Madua, that Malo Shabana, Teba Chimbola, Migba, Sherabla, Demba, Lo Shu Jurugi, Nimbo Jeba, Deju Gombala, Juba, and then Ranshen Tamji, Lusola, Migba, and then Luso Tombani to Ila Jeba, Sachi Lu, Da, and then Same Lu Toba. Chinruk nyamsu lemba da tunba, ane nyana jesu zimba da tunba lu gyuma tsowa milam sem namka che jindar sheba samshindu sibar kolo gyuwa sochi Gyälwa rangshingi wongbo nobe dhamma nyesha gomba na temengi ishe so tang je madeba gomba dine lame nyade juba number the temba city on dinigi gimsen dinit in the yore set that di jushi di tanga jagorda.
The 14 then are, first, your aim is the Mahayana, you rely on wisdom. They act as antidote to the 16 wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. You engage in meditation on the Four Noble Truths. You observe the body, feelings, the mind and phenomena of yourself and others. Sixth, you mentally engage the body, feelings, the mind and phenomena as being empty of true existence, freed from a contaminated body, you will attain one that is uncontaminated. They are concordant with the practices of the 6 perfections. They are compatible with compassionately caring for hearers, solitary realizers, and so forth. 10th, you will understand the body to be like an illusion, feelings to be like dreams, the mind to be like space, and phenomena to be like clouds. You will, in accordance with your intentions, be reborn in cyclic existence as a wheel-turning king and so forth. You will naturally have sharp faculties through meditating on the close placements of mindfulness. Your meditations will not be affected by mentally engaging and so forth in the Tivada. And 14th, you will achieve nirvana without remainder.
나디네 당보 아니 태바 침발에 미파 수도 데 태바 침발에 미파 세데 나디네 지다 나 태바 침발에 미파 세데 난 태바 침발에 아니 톱자 야 아니 상여 고마 토비치도 미파 세다 미파라 샤추고레 안디 멤베게다 태바 침발세도 태바 미파세도 미파라 망보샤 요시데 이나다 가서 다가르시었으나 저기 전주선바 남기 년에 남기 당보 년나 남기 안에 담바 년샤 냠는 제도 가르쳐 왔으나 당보 안에 퇴섬 제고로 퇴섬 제고래 퇴섬 제도 qabla 안에 된주디 가르리 띵고래서는 코로나조 년랑 코로나조라 투모만 배 된신 비게다 된신 남샤 된신 비 되네게 된주라 되네 안에 퇴바제 되네 삼바제 된주에 남는 송취 벤도다 된주 시그로아 되네 시그로아 어디 제가 냐나 남지 덴바 녀자 냠는 지류 걸로 당보 최주 퇴고로 퇴제 된퇴 되네 된다라 삼 되네 공고로 지산 되네 최섬 검섬 지수기 슝 가와레 띵고래세네 아니 냐뉘은 코로나를 투모만 배 된시 비게 아니 denshi namsha denshi begi shung tesola denje, dene sumbola denje, chesam komsum jigo rejeriwa, mato tyaba chen begi shung, samba tongpa ni denada, dene ge shung la denje, chesam komsum jigo mara cheza, gare tingose nyandu ge dene, nyandu koronzo la denshi be, dene zamla denje, chesam komsum, dela denje, chesam komsum jigo res, chung jua bayanza, nyandu namdi jigo reje. Da 전주 선바디기 딜레 개발도 파바래 가르 파바래스나 전주 선바님기 담만예죠 공비 최선 공론 제디 안에 지게 조 그런 쪽에 태바 챔비기 아니 데뉴 숨래 야 덴바다 디마세 아니 태바 멤비기 데뉴 숨래 그 태면을 덴시비 슝 데뉴 숨라 최선 공론 제바 마세 조 태바 챔비기 데뉴 숨리야 안 최선 공론 제제 델라 덴제 아니 아가서 담만예죠 공고를 해지래 디네자 알선이 가르쳐버 파바세데 전주선바 남기 아니 태바 챔비기 데뉴 숨라 최섬 제바 마세 아니 년뒤기 코로나들 최섬 검수 제야다 조 태바 챔비든 지고레스 지상 가르쳐버 여러세네 년뒤기 코로나 주기 태멘바랑 땡지비 데뉴 마도 신 데뉴라 최섬 제바 마제르바 지나다 전주선바 남기 년뒤를 땡지비 데뉴 최섬 제 아니 조 데뉴 마젤 아니 거기서 태바 챔비기 데뉴 숨라 조 델레 최섬 제바자 델레 슝마라 최섬 제르제 최섬 거가 제유도 태바 챔비 데뉴 나라 땡신 비기다 자모 동방이 대위 남샤다 데니기 나 자주 세미 냠는 제 림바 망보 시킨 거로 데네자 네 최섬 검섬 제소 제기 당보 슝 데뉴 숨보 델라야 아니 냠는 제탕이 돈에 한 전주 셈바디게 한 해봐도 파바래 해야지.
Looking at the first then, your aim is the Mahayana. So for those who are wanting to engage in the practice of the Four Noble Truths, they will do so through engaging in the practice of the close placements of mindfulness. This we've already heard in the preceding outlines. In order to be able to do that, they need to first hear, whilst hearing, reflect, and thereafter become able to meditate on these teachings. So we have the hearing, reflecting, and meditating. And all practitioners will need to engage in this way, whether they are of the Tibetan lineage or the Mahayana lineage. So those of the Tibetan lineage will hear sutras and commentaries to those sutras on how to cultivate the training or engage in the training of the 4 close placements of mindfulness in order to cultivate or engage in the trainings of the 4 noble truths. And those texts that they are studying, those sutras and commentaries, will be those of the Tibetan tradition. And hearing teachings, they will reflect and then come to meditate on them. Bodhisattvas will follow a similar process. They will also hear sutras and commentaries to the sutras on how to engage in the trainings of the 4 noble truths in order to engage in the practice of the Bodhisattvas will also hear teachings on the sutras and the commentaries to the sutras on how to engage in the practice of the 4 close placements of mindfulness in order to engage in the 4 noble truths. And they will thereby be hearing as well as reflecting, and thereafter come to be able to meditate on the 4 close placements of mindfulness. So thus far, we don't see a difference in the approach between those of the Tibetan lineage and those of the Mahayana lineage. Where the difference comes, though, is firstly in what they hear. Those of the Tibetan lineage will hear sutras and commentaries to them of their lineage. Those of the Mahayana will hear sutras and commentaries to those sutras that are in accordance with both the Tibetan tradition as well as the Mahayana tradition. So they will hear far more teachings, study far more texts, and thereby have far more points to reflect on and later meditate on. So this is a key difference in this first point between how bodhisattvas hear and thereby are able to reflect and meditate. They study the Mahayana texts in order to achieve the Mahayana goals. They study the Tibetan texts in order to be able to benefit beings of the Tibetan lineage. So therefore, the bodhisattvas hear far more extensively or study far more extensively and thereby can reflect and later meditate in a far more extensive manner too.
Taba chimbo la mi pa la de ni taba chimbo ki de ne zo nyam len che ho de taba chimbo ki de ne na la ka ru sung ko re se ne ni chu ki da me ge zo jin nyomo ba pang ba la an chu ki da me ko mo ya chu ki da me to bu lo ko mo ya sung ko ro ji san de ni ki mi ba si de na chu ki da me to be ki mi ba de ka sun dong ba ni le ya sha shu re mi ba dong ba ni ji san mi ba de da nga ju ki chu ki da me to be 로디 다 타바 남기 남자 가소리 아주 대윈 남자 시용뒤 태칭에 타바 침보세리 취기 담에도 로디를 타바 침보 가서는 유 취기 담에 띵사바 안배마시 뉴 자차와 인자 디도비 로디라 아니 디도비니 람디 냠네지 공바이나 마주게 산지고 뭐 톱투고요 반자 타바 침보세야 돼 진짜 타바 침보를 미바시 타바 침비에 람 냠네지 그 검제 수고 미바디 동반이네 미고래 해야지 언두스제나 자샤잖아 잡쇼고래 야나 남기 가르쳐서는 코로나 주게 타바 좀 토벌 제바 인자 제가 산지고 뭐 투비치도 아니 냠네지고 막 타바 투비치도 냠네지 좀 코로나 주게 냠네지 미에 대한 다음에 봤으면 미고래 해야지 언디네 이찬에고 개발도 봐봐래서 미바 개발 침발이 미바세야 되네 제시 어제난 야예를 받쳐거래 지난한 좀 뒤에 원도 제비게 자친다 태민시도 년면에 제라마와는 되대바딜라 안 태면 발라그로와 샘자마 우마랑 유바다 근데 가서 우마 땡겨발라 태신바 좀 뒤에 원도 제비 태신나 태민 디시고 지난 디 기시에도 가르쳐고서는 지난 샘자마다 우마랑 유바 땡겨바 숨기 취게 다음에 켈링 거를 지난 취게 다음에 또 따와디 유바자 디 따와디 개차와레스 개차와자 태신 바스 태신세야디 개체중 기식으로 디네 냐나 남기 추기 다음에 킬링고 메니 제라마와도 되대바 추기 다음에서 킬링고 말면서 콘주길에 추기 다음에 또 따와도 매바래 인자 콘주 따와데 가서 가사 란지 튜비 수주바 또베 동어도베 따와 잠리 제가 디 따와디 개충와래서 제가 이제 따위 전에 추기 다음에 또 따와데 개차와 아니 나 다음에 란지 튜비 수주바 또베 따와디 아니 가서 개충와래 인자 디기 따위 전에 아니 샘잠바다 네 라디오바 태신 우마팅이 벗음라 네가서 태신이 줍다마 태신 바스 지고래 네 되려바다 제라마와라 태멘바 태멘이 줍다마와 태멘바스 제가 따와 개친구 지치고 제가 니네자 네고 태바침벌 미바스 따와되어서 취기 담에 또 따와 미바 취기 담을면 뒤 따와 공바디 개쳐와서지 태신이 따와 차고로 태바침벌 미바스 개쳐와서 어디 나진들죠 지바로 차고도
At the outset of looking at the reasons why the close placement of mindfulness that is practiced in the Mahayana is superior to that which is practiced in the Tibetan tradition, it's good to understand then the primary distinction between the Mahayana and the Tivada. So the distinction is made in two ways. First is in terms of path, which is relating to the objective. The practitioners of the Tibetan tradition are striving for their individual liberation. That is their objective, and they are striving to free themselves from cyclic existence. Those who are practicing the Mahayana Dharma are not striving for liberation, but rather for Buddhahood. And they are not striving for that goal for their own benefit, which is that of individual liberation, but rather for the benefit of all sentient beings. They are striving for their goal. So that is how one is the first way to divide the Mahayana and the Tibetan traditions, is in terms of their path. Then the second way is in terms of their view. So of the four Buddhist philosophical schools, the tenets of the Vaibhashika and Sautrantika are the tenets of the Tivada, whereas the tenets of the Chittamatrans and the Middle Way, and with the Middle Way, both the Svatrantika and Prasangika divisions, the Chittamatra and Middle Way, these two are included within Mahayana. So here the difference between Tivada and Mahayana is made in terms of their view, not in terms of their path, their objective. Here, in terms of view, the Tibetan tenets of Vaibhashika and Sautrantika, they assert solely the selflessness of persons. They assert solely the selflessness of persons, and they assert that in order to achieve liberation from samsara, one's own individual liberation, it's sufficient to realize that the person lacks a self-sufficient substantial existence self. The Mahayana tenets of the Chittamatra and the Middle Way, they do assert selflessness of persons. They also additionally assert the selflessness of phenomena. So therefore, the division in terms of view between the Tivada and the Mahayana is as to whether selflessness of phenomena is asserted or not. And in the Mahayana tenet, which do assert the selflessness of phenomena, this is the primary point of meditation, to realize the selflessness of phenomena. So these are then the two ways that one divides the Mahayana and the Tivada in terms of path, and here we would think about the goal that is being achieved and for whom it's being achieved. And then the second way is in terms of tenets or view. And here we can say as to whether the selflessness of phenomena is asserted or not, is how one would divide the tenets.
제가 남도 원 제바에는 아주 전주 샘규래 개바에는 타바침벽 강사리라 그러와 전주 샘규래 매개바제 람 냠네 지금 강사 디게라 타바맨비 강사셔야 되지 히어로 그래서 남개 친구지 남기 원도 시고래 다 준비 원도 제바에는 최게 다음에 케링행기 강사들라 네 타바침벽 강사 아니 최게 다음에 케멜랭행기 강사 다데 람 가서래 나서 낭바 따위 남자 라제 투비스도 투비 따와 케링행기 다음에 봐 켈링한디게 가서래 태반만 바시기시거와 지자 디네 연장 아주 미니 년뒤에다 랑겔 람냠네 제되겐 아니 동바니 또한 강라 강사죠로와 동바니 데소 람기 온도 제반에 태면배 강사를 가서 자주심 줄게요 말아봐 나 따위 온도 진에 태신 맞차들 가서 그것도 취기 다음에 또 따와 줄게 사를 취기 다음에 켈링거와 지자 디네 연장 혼도 남기 원도 전에 태면 바래 가서 전심 길게 말 따용도 전에 태천 바래 진짜 디네다 그 따용도 집에 태천 태면서다 남기 원 태치 되면 되스 가가 제거만 양 같이 지금 야 좀디원도 지 태면 라도 남기 원도 태면에 찍바로 삼다나 다 노트 좀 제거 뒤버 제거 말해 람기 오도지비 태면 바세다 좀디 오도지 태면 바세 이게 직바 삼다와나 직바 차요 말이지 그래서 년도에 람 다음에 또 비동이 또 한지 란이 도와디 고 대외 오도지비기 태신 바차려 그래 람기 오도지비 태면 바래 진짜 대외 오도지비 태면 바다 람기 오도지 태면 바세 직바 말해 나 대외 오도지비 태신 바다 람기 오도지 태신 바세 직바 차고 말해 진짜 태면 먼저 넘긴 태면라요도 텔라 따용도 집에 태면 받아 태면 지하다 람기어도 지 태면 지에 이용고래 저다디 캬바를 채고 그래 나 람기 태친 발라도 람디어도 집에 태친 발라도 따용도 집에 태친 바니디 캬바를 채고 그래 저다 다 넘유잉아도 슝나라 망제 가브리라 태신 태면라도 준비어도 집에 따용도 집발라 송용고 용고랄까 망체와데 람기어도 집바디 기시오 용다데라 태친 태면 세야디 람기어도 집바디 기시고래
So therefore we see that we divide between the Tivada and the Mahayana in terms of both path and view. So just to repeat this a little bit and also to expand a little bit on the word on what the Sanskrit for yana or in English vehicle. So we talk about, which is another way of translating Mahayana, and then instead of Tivada, one can say Hinayana. So that word yana is the word for vehicle. So those who practice the path of the Mahayana or the great vehicle, they have generated bodhicitta in their continuum. That is what distinguishes a path of the great vehicle. And those who aspire to generate the path of the great vehicle, the path of the Mahayana in their continuum, it's explicitly bodhicitta they are striving to cultivate. And the reason then that here those who have cultivated bodhicitta in their continuum and are on the paths of the Mahayana, why they said they're on the great vehicle paths. Great here we should understand as in vast, not necessarily as in superior, but as in vast. It is vaster than the Mahayana is vaster than the Hinayana. So these are literally great and small, but it's referring to vaster and narrower, in that the objective, enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, is a very different objective than the individual liberation for one individual. So therefore, the path is vaster or narrower, great and lesser. So that it's important to understand the meaning of these words here. And then in terms of view, the same terminology is used of the Mahayana and the Hinayana, or a preferred translation of Tivada. The terms are the same, but here in terms of view, it's divided in terms of whether the tenant accepts or assert rather, selflessness of phenomena or not. So the Mahayana tenets assert the selflessness of persons and the selflessness of phenomena. And of the two, the selflessness of phenomena is primarily meditated on, and therefore the primary meditation of those who accept the Mahayana tenets, those of the Chittamatra and the middle way schools, they primarily meditate on emptiness. Their observed object is primarily emptiness, and they cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness. Then, when we're dividing by view, those of the Tibetan view or the Hinayana view, the lesser vehicle view, those are the tenets of the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika. And they only assert the selflessness of persons. They don't assert the selflessness of phenomena. So they only meditate on the selflessness of persons. So this view is then not as profound as the view of the Mahayana. Therefore, the meaning here of Maha, or great, in terms of the vehicle, is that the view is more profound. Whereas for the Hinayana, or the lesser vehicle, the Tivada, the view is less profound because it's just focusing on the self of the person being lacking as self-supporting, substantially existent. So that is a lesser view, a simpler view, a less profound view. That's better. A less profound view than the greater, the vastly more profound view of the greater vehicle, which is the wisdom realizing emptiness. So this is how the Mahayana and the Hinayana are divided in terms of firstly path and secondly view, as well as then the etymology, the meaning of great and lesser, Mahayana, Maha and Hina. Generally though, and then the last point here to make, generally in our texts, when we hear about, first one other point. So therefore we should understand that someone who has achieved a path in their continuum will not necessarily have achieved the same path, the identical path, of another person on that same path. There is a difference in the quality, there's a difference in the path of someone who's achieved the path of the Mahayana, as opposed to someone who's achieved a path of the Hinayana or the Tivada. And that difference of the path is both in terms of the objective and perhaps in terms of their view. So we shouldn't think that someone who's achieved a particular path necessarily has the same realization as another practitioner on that same path. And then the last point here to make is that generally when we hear about the difference between the Mahayana and the Hinayana or the Tivada, generally that in most cases that division is made in terms of their path, their objective. So whether bodhicitta has been generated, in other words, whether they're striving for enlightenment, or whether they're striving for their own individual liberation. In most cases, when we hear about a Mahayana practitioner or a Tibetan practitioner, that is where the difference is made in terms of path, in terms of whether bodhicitta has been generated and they're striving for enlightenment or individual liberation. In topics of a more philosophical nature, usually topics such as tenets, there the division is more likely to be made in terms of view rather than in terms of path. But in most other cases, other than tenets, that when we hear Mahayana, it's referring to someone who's striving for enlightenment, not necessarily someone who has the tenet of the Mahayana.
나는 니바 셰럽레 템바스 다 셰럽레 템바라데다 안주에다 donala 지시고랑 안주 되지 자만이자 공묘도 아니 저기 랑게칭이 지칭이 단의 공부치도 지칭이 되라 공묘도 갑라 다 냐나 남기 가르 공부를 세네 미니조 지칭이 다음에 버도 비셔럽 다음에 또 비셔럽 되는 공부를 봐 조디 공부를 다 지상 다 랑게 가서 전주세만 남게 가로선 또 동반이 또 배, 동반이 또 배셔랍래. that ji tsinyi di tongpa ni ra tenpa ma drupa sam tangchi komyo du tongpa ni tobe shera kombo re chis tongpa tenpa lui tenpa nyesha lui dang chowa de sem na chue shibo kangro na rangi tsinyi ji tsinyi ni ta ne kombo kubi ji tsinyi de la to tongpa ni tobe ge shera ane di tena kombo re tena za ane di chane da kyabarta pakwa re skarsa nyana di konzule tenpa nyesha komyo du tongpa ni tobe shera yo ma re china da janjusimbe gyula ji tsinyu ko midapa tobe dunga wa towa da ane diga da rangye tubi zizu tubi tonga tonga dacha rangwa jingi tubi tonga tonga diga la tongpa yin tobe du lo diya yore tongpa yin tobe lo yore nyana namla da shidi ma to tongpa yin tobe lo di me re tenza ta tongpa yin zo se diya zo se urko zo tongpa yin tobe lo la lo yoba yin za di dina kumgu yoba za di li kepa to papa re se shere kwe chene kepa papa se
Looking then at the second of the 14 differences, you rely on wisdom. So we know that the close placement of mindfulness utilizes wisdom, of whichever lineage the practitioner is. However, what this specifically refers to is that when practitioners of any lineage engage in the meditation, as we've heard, they do so through first the specific characteristic and then the general characteristics. So there's no difference. Also, the specific characteristic is the same, and there are the four general characteristics, those of impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. Practitioners of the Tibetan lineage as well as the Mahayana lineage engage in those four and meditating through those four general characteristics. Where the difference comes is for the practitioner of the Tibetan lineage. Of those four, they primarily meditate on selflessness, on the self lacking and lacking self-sufficient substantial existence. Of the four general characteristics, practitioners of the Tibetan lineage will primarily focus on this one. Bodhisattvas, on the other hand, whilst meditating on the same specific characteristic and the same four general characteristics of impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless, in addition to this, they meditate on the lack of inherent existence, on emptiness. And not only do they meditate on this in addition, this is their primary object of meditation, emptiness. So this is the meaning of the second point. You rely on wisdom. Bodhisattvas additionally and primarily cultivate the wisdom realizing emptiness.
Komiyage da nyana namdiyo komiyage chamba nyesha dila chenju semba namdiyo komiyage chamba nyesha di yaksho re la kuro chotu yuwa de yaga re la kuro wa da yaga inbi yumzen di karasane dila kyeche ro sun mana yaga maa yor si kuro wa da kanchi da donda la yaga dhubiya de karasane kunlong chane chenju semgi sin chenju sembi semja tamji ki donda sanju goba di kunlong chenju semgi sin ande di chi chenju komiyo de zo tongpa ni komguyo ba za di chene da zik dor du da shubay na di re da di chene ko nyana de ya cha karsa nyana di korona do jikbu tarba toye de ma do semje tamji gi do sanju go ban tobe gi le mere chisa janju semba di semje tamji gi do na sanju go ban tobe chi de samlo de pe kunlo de ja chen bo shu ji yo ba za kunlo chene kya ba pa ba dan dawa di la di de do an ji chen dawa gomdi ka be ine ya nyana namji digono ko tarba tobe chido ko ma tarba tobalo nyomo bang di nyomo ba ya nyebo de dame ba ranje tobe zu zu ba tobe dawa de komba de nyomo ba bang tu ko tarba top tu ko di zamma do dongba ni kom go ma ra da ja ju sama namji zo dongba ni chi semja tamji ge de sanju go ba tobalo nyomo ba di ba ba cha da je bang wo zhen di nyebo dong yi tobe shara kom go re chi zan di yin za dong yi tobe shara kom go re chi zan di ni za janju semgi nyamne kunlo janju semgi kunye la da ane kazore di chi chi komi tongma ni tobe sherap tiza janju semna tongyu tobe lo ni nyamne chibe chane da chodu yakshore sa de dor du she shana dire da.
So as we've already heard, that the practitioners of the Tibetan lineage will primarily meditate on the selflessness of persons. They will do so reflecting that the person lacks a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, and they will do so believing that through developing this realization, they will abandon the afflictions together with their seeds, and they themselves will achieve liberation. So that is their view and their objective together. Those of the Mahayana, or the Mahayana lineage, they cultivate primarily the wisdom realizing the selflessness of phenomena, or to express that differently, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So they cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is that all phenomena lack inherent existence. And they are doing so conjoined, this wisdom is conjoined with bodhicitta, which means the objective that they are trying to fulfill through meditating on emptiness is to eradicate not only the afflictions together with their seeds, but also the stains of the afflictions. Because that is required in order to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of others. So here we see the difference, here we see for the bodhisattvas, their path, their objective, as well as their view together. They're cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness, conjoined with bodhicitta, in order to eliminate the subtle stains of the afflictions, because that is required in order to become a Buddha for the sake of others. So here we can see, in this deeper understanding of the second point, to rely on wisdom, that both the motivation and the view of the bodhisattva is vaster and more profound. And this is the meaning again of Maha, or great, in great vehicle, Mahayana. The vastness of the motivation and the profundity, the depth of the view. That is what is meant by greater. And for this reason, the approach of the Mahayana is superior to that of the Tivada.
Tene loshu churugi nyembo cheba sidida loshu churugi nyembo cheba se loshu churu se demba shila mibigi loshu churu shili gore loshu churu se ne dunga demba le mibigi loba loshu shi tene go dunga kunje demba le mibigi loshu shi tene go tele mibigi loshu shi tene namde le mibigi loshu shi sene da shi be shile loshu churu tishi gore cheza tene inzam loshu churu digi nyembo di karasan dejan lu tamba nyesha sem tamba chue tamba nyesha komyo de desuge ngomje kombe kabla danganzo loshu churu gi nyembo chigores ta dia chibare da loshu churu gi nyembo sidi da meni nyana namjo komde loshu churu gi nyembo komgore chigore ina nyana namji komde nyandwe da rangye nam jang di ko ki shi ko da nyandwe da rangye nam ji ne ka so le tamba nyesha de kyo are chanju simbi ki tamba nya ya are la ko da chi sa nyana nam ji nyana da rangye de ki tamba nyesha ko mi du lo churu gi nyembo chi ko are ina chanju simba de ki ko mi du lo churu gi nyembo che ba chi sa lo churu gi nyembo chi bi ko ne kheba pa pa re la ja kar so na chanju simba nam ki loju churugi nyembo komye zo tongye dobe dawa de komgore nyana namji zo dawa komde rangje dobe surbe dawa komgore jiza dine enza janju sembadige da tongye dobe dawa de kombade di kebar papa enza jiza loju churugi nyembo kone kebar papa se loju churugi nyembo kombe denji gomyode ane tongba nyela mibike lu so sem ane ka che shi den do ji chenye tongba nye samdaje 동방이 또 배시랍 공고를 스테자 로슈르기 님벽에 캬바도 파바래 사디시고래
Then looking at the third reason, they act as antidotes to the 16 wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. So the 16 wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. There are 4 that relate to suffering, there are 4 to origination, 4 to cessation, and 4 to path. And it's through cultivating the close placements of mindfulness that one cultivates the antidote to these 16 wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. And this is correct for practitioners of both the Tivada and Mahayana lineage, because both of them engage in the practice of cultivating the four close placements of mindfulness in order to engage in the practice of the Four Noble Truths, and this serves as the antidote to these 16 wrong ways of engaging in the Four Noble Truths. So on that level, there is no difference. The difference comes down, though, to the quality of wisdom that is being cultivated. Those of the Tibetan lineage are primarily cultivating the selflessness of persons. That is their primary meditation, realizing that the self lacks self-sufficient substantial existence. Whereas the bodhisattvas, as we've heard, they develop a far more profound wisdom in that they are cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness. So it is on this point, the quality of the wisdom that is being cultivated, the quality of the antidote that is being cultivated. This is where the difference comes.
Dunga demba khorong kares ngo mita pare so kichi chibi mita pare la go mita pa se or chikche da dunga demba di dunga wares kyu le da nyomo onge kebi ki dunga wares mo khorong dunga wares mo mita pare dunga wares so da dunga demba di ane ta chue rawa jin jibi tong wares jisu tong wares so da dunga demba di kansa ranje jibi sizu jibi tong wares 지상 키슈 시디 디시오 동아딘비 키슈 시데 미다파 동어 동어 다음에 봐서 시디 키슈 시시오 지상한도 류레 미베 잠반이제 고면도 류라면에 지진이 kom도 류 미다파 곰 데네 류데 안에 동어와 곰 동어와 임바 제바 류데 안 동어 다시 장원지 그 동어 곰 류데 안에 라예도 비스 동어 다음에 곰 시기 지진이 곰도 지지데 셰바 지상 디 동아딘베데 디시디 곰고로 봐 지나디 da dunga wa khorong da loshuk labyu lokwa shuba labyu dunga de ba khorong o mita bare de dunga de ba takpa re sem zimba de loshuk re da kasne mita ba de lo ne takpa zimba ro da dunga de ba de ani dunga wa re de dunga wa imba je nga ju ge ka del losh dewa jingo re dewa zimba re je re jisan di loshuk re da nga dunga de ba de 다주 라운지 유튜브 동아래데 디 도초를 다주 라운지 유튜브에 선배 진바이나 진바의 로슈래 다주 라운지 유튜브에 선 진바이나 풍부 동아된 바 다주 라운지 유튜브 진바의 로슈래 다 로셰르 바 로슈래 다 가사 동아된 바를 미제 제가 라제 투비 주주 투비 진바이나 로슈래 지도 로슈 시세 디소 동아된 바를 미 로시세네 동아된 바 따과 진베 따진 동아된 바 동아 대화 진베 진바 dunga demba tonga kasa tachu rangwa ji juba zimba dunga demba kansa rangyi tu si juba zimba di zimba shi de dunga demba le mi be lo shu shi la go re lo shu la no lo she se de da yu de anga zu kasa dunga demba le mi je dunga demba de takpare sen zimba de da lokshu re lokshe re de dunga demba de tachu rawa ji juba re zimba na da
Each of the Noble Truths has 4 of these characteristics associated with them. So if we look at the noble truth of suffering, then it has the characteristics of impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. So these we've already heard before in terms of the general characteristics. So therefore, the way that the meditation serves here to overcome these wrong ways of engaging the noble truths is that the wrong way of engaging the noble truth of suffering is that true sufferings are seen as permanent, as not as being happiness, as not being in the nature of suffering, as not being empty, and as not being selfless. So through cultivating the understanding that true sufferings are a change momentarily, one comes to realize that they are impermanent and not permanent, and thereby overcomes that wrong way of engaging the true sufferings. Similarly, one comes to realize that true sufferings are not happiness, they are in the nature of suffering. Thirdly, one comes to realize that true sufferings are not permanent, unitary, and independent, but are empty of being permanent, unitary, and independent. And fourthly, one comes to realize that true sufferings are not utilized, are not made use of or used by or utilized by a person that is self-sufficient, substantially existent, because no such person exists. So in this way, one overcomes these four wrong ways of engaging true sufferings, and realizes that true sufferings are impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless.
Dine za lokshu se dunga dempa le meje dunga dempa ta lokshu sene de lokshu glabdi dunga dempa mita wato bolo di chema di ngone chema che dile doksho di ne garasen dunga dempa taba jinde ba na lokshu glabro de lokshu se gro 제가 데니게 dunga dempa le mi be lokshu shi nyembo dunga dempa tedo ka so re lule mi che damanye cha komyo du ane garusen 데니게 로슈 시기 nyembo chigo de che ro 제가 가서 lule mi ne di mitaba komyo du ane ga so re nga 주기 dunga dempa lokshu gi ane mitaba lule mi che taba chime ta sin ne di ta sin nyembo cha ro ro mitaba komyo de da lule mi ne li di dunga we rashin 레다 녀모 dunga we rashi imba samtang de akasore mare luseole 초와 식으로 초와를 가지고 초와 식도 초와를 미시 초와디 아주 가르친 거라서네 dunga wale dewa jimba 시아디 디시고를 당아 주기 가르친 거라서네 아주 다다 초와들 dunga다 유에 dunga 차와도 dunga 세쳐봐 아주 dunga디 가서 유에 dunga디 dewa 진 거로 봐 아주 다 띵기 dewa 톱자 탈도 등 아주 디삼된 거로 봤더니 내가기 dewa디 다 디톱이게 된다는 거죠 베지야다 근데 디 아주 류디베네 베지 장어마다 지금 류디 장위라신 진 거로 봐 당아주 수기 풍부 제상아주 장위라신 제 델리아 두로 요야다 주야다 디치做过거기도 세네 디치고로 진짜 디네자 장와 진바 델리아 로슈 지당的로슈 시시의大把 진바 대화 진바 장와 진바 다도 주바 진바 로슈 시지시고래 로슈 시 다등이 지당 로슈 시시고 다등이 시야돼 로슈 시시야 지당 로슈 시 대지 시야등이 누가 된발에 미비게 로슈 시시시로와 다 양장아 저기 로슈 시시도 동아 풍부의 미제 장화 진 그사 장바 진바 장화다 다바다 안에 그 소리 대화다 안에 다도 주바세 로슈 시시고 네 자 장화 대화 다바 안에 다도 주바세로와 디시디 로슈 시시고 지상 장화 진바 ane dewa jimba, ane dakwa jimba, then dadu dhubba jimba sigurwa. Nga zogi deji kasa zangwa dewa, zangde dada shi lagurwa. Chida danga deji xie kishu chi de kasa na midaba, dongwa, dameba shi shirwa. Di doksho shi di sigurwa da. Doksho shi di kasa na nga zo lule mi ne nga zo kari jingora se ne 저게 딱바 친구래지. 그래서 류디 기디나 지엠의 팅기 가서 딱바 친구래서. 진짜 류를 미베 전반 이제 고명도 류 딱바지면 다진기 님보지고래지. 시고래. 진짜 초월의 미제 전반 이제 고명도 가서는 dewa zimba di nyimbo chigo re. Nga zu gidi na tsowa gyuyu dunga di gidi na dewa tingi dewa gyuwa mebe dewa simtsin tuko re. Ko dewa ma re, ko dunga re so. Tuanyi ngo na gyuyu dunga re. Nga zu ki dunga samha moga chi dewa simtiko re. Chisa di lo shi. Ta nga zu pungpo di ka semle mi je daxue rangwa jingi zhuba jingo, daxue rangwa jingi zhuba jingo re. Chisa di jingbi ki da daxue rangwa jingi zhuba jingba de, daxue rangwa jingi zhuba ma re de, ine daxue rangwa jingi zhuba jingba ya. Da nga chue lai mi ne dadu zhuba jingo re, dadu zhuba. 다시 랑와진 유튜브 진발하러와 초바 참바신 루안의 미다바던 눈 거소리 규기란 마디베 랑와 띠누미지베 딱바와 채셔라 메디베 가서 규기란 메디베 랑와 띠누미지베 딱바 채셔라 메디 지보디 숨과 초바 진발에 다시 랑와진 유튜브 진거와 디지 숨기 초바 마주바들 다시 랑와진 마주바시거와 디 따바 짐바세 들어와 대화 짐바 다시 라와징이 주바세 최来明年俺就开始大学让我进去准备经过去，确诊半年下过没有大学让我准备准备也不查过来这边，大学让我进去准备。安尼告诉我们全门sem诊半年下过没有呗？sem诊半年下过没有的大学让我进去准备个准备的个也不去过来。安尼俺这个确诊半年下过没有的，安尼但是告诉我的。다도 주바 짐바 라게 투비스 주바 짐바티 님보치 거레스 지산 디 로슈 시디 키시드 지당 아주 로슈 주룩시야다 로슈 시시야 치로와 로슈 시라비오드 안 따바 짐바 데와 짐바 다시 라와징 주바 짐바 다도 주바 짐바 세 로슈 시시 거레 디시디 지단 시레 다 덴시 미제 동아데비 키주 시드 디시보디 동아데비 키주 자르 거레다 로슈시 동아데발 미비 키주 로슈 주룩 나네 당보시 자르와 다데 가도 지단에 다데 키시디 다도 짐바 따바 짐비 로슈 데와 짐비 로슈 아니 다시 라와징 주베 짐비 로슈 네 가사라니 주베 짐비 로슈신 로슈 시시 거레 로슈 시라비 디시시엔도 갑라 가르시 워스는 담마 류담마 녀자 공베가 로슈 가리긴 뭐 지기리라나 가소레 따와진베기 따진디기 뭐 지기리에세 근데 초와담마 녀자 공베 가리 로슈디 뭐 지기르스네 둥아와라 데와진베기 로슈디 뭐 지기리에세 다 셈담마 녀자 공베도 가리 뭐 지기리라나 아니 다시 랑와징이 주바 진베 로슈디 뭐 지기리에세 최담마 녀자 공베도 가리 뭐 지기리라나 네 라디오 비즈즈 주바 짐베 로슈디 님보치기레스 로슈 시디기 님보텔라 때는 잠반이 시디레리 곱시게 시라 시 직시에와다 네
Well, thank you for your patience. Gyälwa went into a different direction and I got a bit confused. So here, we're of course in the context of the Four Noble Truths, and there they are. The Four Noble Truths have 16 aspects, and without having realized the 16 aspects, one engages them in a wrong manner, and therefore wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. More generally, though, there's another list of four, which four ways, wrong ways of engaging, one could say, but generally they can translate it as the four mistaken thoughts or the four wrong conceptions. So these are quite different. It's a completely different list. Nevertheless, this practice of the close placements of mindfulness serves to eradicate these four wrong conceptions or these four mistaken thoughts. So those four are conceiving the impure as pure, conceiving suffering as happiness, conceiving impermanence as permanence, and conceiving that which lacks a self as having a self. So I'll go through each of them. I went through each of them, so these will be repeated. So the first of these, conceiving the impure as pure, this is overcome through wait, let me just check my notes here. I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah. So overcoming the first one, seeing the impure as pure. Yeah. This is overcome through reflecting on the close placement of mindfulness on the mind. And it relates also to the general characteristic specifically of seeing that the mind is not permanent, unitary, and independent. It's empty of being permanent, unitary, and independent. So through reflecting on the close placement of mindfulness on the mind, one comes to see the mind is empty of being permanent, unitary, and independent, and thereby overcomes the wrong conception of grasping at the impure as being pure. Then secondly, conceiving suffering as happiness. So this one overcomes through reflecting on the close placement of mindfulness on feelings. Because we currently mistake pleasant feelings for actual happiness. We haven't realized that these are actually suffering, being an illustration of the suffering of transient happiness. So therefore, through meditating on the close placement of mindfulness on feelings, one comes to see that they are in the nature of suffering, and therefore one overcomes the mistaken conception that where we conceive suffering as happiness, or we mistake happiness for suffering. So that's the second one. The first was conceiving the impure as pure, and the second is conceiving suffering as happiness. Then the third, conceiving the impermanent as permanent. So this one overcomes through reflecting on the close placement of mindfulness on the body, where one comes to see that this body that we grasp at as permanent is actually impermanent in nature. It changes momentarily. And here you remember body encompasses, of course, the physical body, but there were those three divisions encompassing far more than just the physical body. So these we grasp at as permanent. Here, through meditating on the close placement of mindfulness on the body, one realizes that they change momentarily and thereby are impermanent, and we overcome this third mistaken thought or wrong conception of conceiving the impermanent as permanent. Then the fourth wrong conception, conceiving the selfless as having a self. So this one overcomes through reflecting on the close placement of mindfulness on phenomena, realizing that phenomena are not utilized by a person that is self-sufficient, substantially existent. And thereby one overcomes this fourth wrong conception, that of conceiving the selfless as having a self. Oh yeah.
dunga lokshu churugi nyembo che sidui da nyembo che de zogo karase de kyabar phagwa de karasene gare kyabar phaggo karasene dondala di de ji chen yu gomyo de kala dongba ni ge dawe ge chen de chasan rangxin ma zhuba sam dang gom go re rangxin ma zhuba sam dang gom je ne lokshu churugi nyembo di zogo di rangxin ma zhuba dongba ni do be shera ge nyembo che go re di inza nyanai de le kyabar phagwa de sa di char di se losu churugi nyembo kyabar papa se de garsan nyananen yokom je losu churugi nyembo jigoro wa da janjusan nyembo cheba ne kyabar papa se de yaga re la oro da yaga imbi yimzen gare lamna de nyembo che gi ji chinyo ko nyembo che gi tawadi garsan tongban yi tawadi res many yana de dami beta, Ranya to be Zizu to be Tawa Kungur, Mother Tomba New Kumgo, the Janju Sambanam, Delia Tomba New Comba Inza, and the D. Cheneco as a lost shooting in Bachaba, Chico, the Enza, and Janju Sambadi Yahade, Sigurwa.
To come back from our divergence, back to this point, the third point here. They act as antidotes to the 16 wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. And again, so both practitioners of the Tivada and Mahayana lineage, through engaging in the Four Noble Truths through the practice of the four close placements of mindfulness, they calculate the antidote to the 16 wrong ways of engaging in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. But those of the Tibetan lineages primarily do this through cultivating the fourth general characteristic, that of selflessness, realizing that the person lacks self-sufficient substantial existence. Whereas those of Bodhisattva lineage, they, in addition to that meditating on the four characteristics, including selflessness, they primarily are cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness, the wisdom realizing that the self and all phenomena lack inherent existence. And thereby, their antidote to the 16 wrong ways of engaging in the Four Noble Truths is that much more profound.
Dinigidan, those in the just Rapara, Cavara, the Nation, Rapara, Dirwa. Ship Tower, and Yanchi Della Chavach and Jimbuch and a ditch and a carrying or digit to what down the Pachavach and Delia Substick share, Danjik down, Shahua Mochago, what in it.
This is really the briefest of brief explanations on the differences here in these first few points. One can really explain this in really great detail. People can debate this extensively. So there's a huge amount to say here, but this is just a brief overview of these first few points.
Dene Dembashila Chuba, said the Dembashila Chubicone Cabra Yorella, Jizangazo Kizin, the Tambashi Nizio Combadi, Shidu Combadi Karasan, Dembashila Chubi Chedu Incident, Chizan Dembashila Chuba, Dua Demba Com, Casa, Lutan Banija Combege, Dua Demba, Yamlanchi Jurugore, and so Damanaja Combe, Kunju Dembala Jugore, the nature Damanaja Combe, Cortella Ju, and then Caso Lam, Semda Manaja Combe, Cortella Ju, Damanaja Combe, Lam de la Jugores, and Kizindi Shusarava. Chisada, Yananam Gi, Damanaja Comde, Dembashi Yamlanchi Jubi, Judu Comba, Jugore, Janjusemanam Gia, the Dembai Casa Damanaja Combadi, Dembashi Combala Jubadi, Chivaravada. Tani Cabar the Papa Carre Laduda, that did not Tombani Topitavi Honeshama de Yamar, the Carson, Janjusemanam Gi. Tembanyeja con Tembashila Chu and the Tembashi, the Unkunju, Ungote, Lamde, Sadi, Chu and the Kabla, de la Tombani topic, Tombani, Samatache, and Gortendia, and the Garso, Lamde, City, Niembo Comia, Lamde, the Carson, Tombani topic, Shara, Tawa, Tombani to be Chet, Chasan, and the Rashi, Majuba, some, the Demba Mamiba, some Tajo Kumbuya Inza, and the Dichane, Dembashila Chuba Combadi, Dembashila Yamsuleon. Tichazan, Janjusemanagi, Rashi Maduba, Demaduba, sometimes Nimslin Gores. The Janju Nimini Negi, Tadi Rashi Maduba, Demaduba, sometimes Somalim Bainza, Janjusemanagi, Dembashi, Demaduba, some tone, and Nimslem Baza, that Dembashilu Jubatia, Janjusemanagi, Dembashilu Jubade, Yagachabares or Kabat Papares Dirwa.
Then the fourth difference, you engage in meditation on the Four Noble Truths. So this may sound a little surprising because we've heard now many times that the purpose of the four close placements of mindfulness is to engage in the practice of the Four Noble Truths. And therefore, practitioners, whether they're of the Tibetan or Mahayana lineage, would engage in the Four Noble Truths through this practice. Through engaging in the meditation, the close placement of mindfulness on the body, they cultivate or engage in the trainings on true sufferings. And through engaging in the meditation on the close placement of mindfulness on feelings, they engage in meditation on true origins. Through engaging in the close placement of mindfulness on the mind, they engage in in true cessations. And through engaging in the close placement of mindfulness on phenomena, they engage in true paths. whether they're of the Tibetan or Mahayana lineage. So what is the difference? As before, the primary difference is the quality of the wisdom that is cultivated in the mind of the practitioner, in that the bodhisattvas engage in the Four Noble Truths through cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness of persons and all phenomena. This is the primary difference. The quality of the wisdom. The path the bodhisattvas engage in is primarily cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness of inherent existence. And this is required for them in order to achieve the particular quality of cessation they are looking for. So therefore, here the meaning then of you engage in meditation on the Four Noble Truths. Why is it superior in the Mahayana? Because of the quality of wisdom that is cultivated.
Zo rashi madhuba samda, zo kungore, zo chayani, zo kungorwa. Da, di ma se kunlo ine, simje tamje sanju goba tobe chido, kunlo janju simji kunye lang, di dine da, ji tsinju kongme zo rashi madhuba samda, zo kungore che, di chane kebat pabare. Da mene nyana dike le, nyana dike kongme de kabla, zo jidang da denpa shi le rashi madhuba samda kongga yungore, ina zo di kunggo mar, zo 다음에 봐 공고를 과 라기어 투비스 주바 조 공고래 지난 군노이네 탈바 좀 더비치들이 되니 자다 개발 봐봐 가지고 세부 야고를 세부 장마 셰셰셰바이는 군노 전시 심제 탐지기들 상유 투비 군노 전시 심기 군에 라제 디드네 따와 라신이 마저 조 공고래 디전에 과 개발 봐봐래스는 자산되는 자산되는 야고 자로.
What we've heard then here, in these differences between the Mahayana and the Theravada, we primarily can point to the difference in the training that we saw in the second outline, where there is a difference in the common as well as the uncommon way of doing this meditation. And we've mentioned now many times in the difference in the common way or the shared way of doing the meditation comes in which general characteristic is primarily emphasized in the meditations of the practitioner. And we've heard now that the Tivadans primarily cultivate the realization of the selflessness of persons, whereas bodhisattvas, they primarily, in addition to that meditation, they primarily cultivate that the wisdom realizing the emptiness of inherent existence. So this is the primary difference in terms of view, but also there's a primary difference in terms of path, in that the bodhisattvas have generated bodhicitta in order to become Buddhas. So there is the primary difference in terms of path. And in order to achieve that path, they require a more profound view. So the path is far vaster, and in order to accomplish that path, a more profound view is required. And that is the emptiness, realizing the emptiness of all phenomena. So this is really what these points boil down to, that bodhisattvas, or the great vehicle, is greater in terms of the vastness of its path and the profundity of its view. So thank you. We'll continue this morning, conclude here this morning, and we'll continue this afternoon from the next points.